Okay, class, so we're going to start out looking at section 4.5, which is the graphs of sine and cosine functions. And so you can read through our objectives and look through our vocabulary, and we'll just talk about them as we get to them. All right, so we start out with just talking about the basic sine and cosine curve, So first let's look at our sine curve. It says, recall that we previously mentioned the domain of sine is a set of all real numbers. Because remember, our x's keep going. When you look at the graph, you can see the arrows on both ends. I mean, it keeps going. When you think about our unit circle, we can keep going round and round and round. Therefore, domain of sine is all real numbers. The range of sine is -1 to +1. If you look at the graph, you can see that the lowest point on the graph is down at -1. The highest point on the graph is up at +1. Also, remember when we're looking at our unit circle, we had talked about because our unit circle only goes down 1 unit, therefore our lowest y value is -1. And from that origin, it also only goes up 1 unit, therefore our highest y value would be 1. We had also stated that the period before is how long it takes the graph to repeat itself. So if you look at this graph that's given here, you can see that we start at 0 and then it begins to repeat itself at 2 pi. So if you look, they have from 0 to 2 pi is in red, and then it's going to just continue to repeat itself. Also, the graph is symmetric with respect to the origin, so that means that our sine function is odd. And we talked about that in one of the last sections that we did, where cosine and its reciprocal are the only even functions and all the others are odd, and their odd functions, remember, are symmetric to the origin, which means if I took a piece of this graph, I reflect it across the x and the y axis, it will land on top of itself. Excuse me. Alright, cosine curve. It says, recall that we also previously mentioned the domain of cosine is a set of all real numbers, just like with sine, and the range is also -1 to 1, also just like sine. We also stated that the period is how long it takes a graph to repeat itself. All of this is like sine. There's very little difference here between sine and cosine. If you notice, if you look back, the only difference is where our graph starts. Cosine starts up at the +1, where sine starts at the 0. Otherwise, they share the same values. But going on, it says, notice here the graph starts at 0 and begins to repeat itself at 2 pi. Another difference is, it says, notice the graph is symmetric with respect to the y-axis. Therefore, a cosine function is even. Remember, if it's an even function, it's symmetric to the y-axis, which means the y-axis is going to split it in half, and we could reflect one side onto the other, and it would lie on top of itself.